Life has a way of catching you off guard during the most mundane moments. It's rarely the dramatic occasions that leave lasting impressions. Instead, it's those subtle instances that weave themselves into ordinary afternoons, shifting your perspective on someone you thought you knew completely. This transformation began for me on an unremarkable day when my brother-in-law arrived to lend a hand around the house. Nothing about his visit seemed extraordinary at first, yet from the instant he crossed my threshold, an indefinable energy filled the space, something I couldn't articulate but absolutely sensed. Before sharing what unfolded, I'm curious about your location as you read this. I find it fascinating to discover the various places these narratives find their way to. Please share your city or town below. It was a brilliant Saturday in early summer, one of those luminous days when golden light seems to dance through every window of your home. For months, I'd been irritated by a loose pantry door, one of those minor domestic frustrations that nags at you constantly, yet somehow never gets addressed. With my spouse away on a weekend camping expedition with college friends, I wasn't eager to fumble with unfamiliar tools and potentially create a bigger mess. That's when David, my husband's older brother, volunteered his services. He's always possessed that rare combination of mechanical aptitude and genuine helpfulness. Confident movements, thoughtful demeanor, and the sort of practical wisdom that immediately puts you at ease. Our relationship spanned nearly 3 decades, though we'd maintained a comfortable distance. Family celebrations brought us together for pleasant but surface-level exchanges, discussions about the season, upcoming holidays, perhaps some good-natured ribbing about his perpetual single lifestyle. The moment I answered the door that afternoon, something felt distinctly different. He stood on my porch holding a worn leather tool bag, his free hand resting casually against the doorframe. His once dark hair, now generously streaked with gray, seemed to catch every ray of sunlight, and his expression held an unusual warmth, lingering a beat longer than customary. Figured I'd better intervene before that door decides to give up. Entirely, he said as he stepped inside. I found myself laughing, tucking a wayward curl behind my ear. About time someone took pity on me. I was seriously considering replacing the whole thing myself. His chuckle followed me toward the kitchen, his footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the oak floors. The atmosphere felt charged somehow. Perhaps it was the way afternoon light filtered through my lace curtains, or maybe the manner in which his glance lingered as I moved about the room. I began clearing the counter space, relocating a ceramic bowl filled with fresh daisies I'd arranged yesterday. Their cheerful white and yellow petals had brightened my entire week. "You've always had such a gift for making spaces beautiful," David remarked suddenly. His comment surprised me. He'd never made personal observations like this before. I paused, meeting his gaze briefly, then simply replied, "Fresh flowers change everything, don't they?" He crouched down to examine the problematic door, spreading his tools methodically across a clean towel he'd brought along. I positioned myself at the island, observing his careful movements. Something deeply satisfying emerged from watching his deliberate process, loosening, realigning, securing. His explanations came in measured, patient tones, though his actual words seemed to fade into background noise. Instead, I found myself studying how shadows played across his features, the gentle creases that appeared when he concentrated. Eventually, he looked up with a knowing smile. "You've gone quiet on me." "Have I managed to make things worse?" I shook my head quickly. "Just fascinated by your technique. You make complex repairs look effortless." A moment of unexpected stillness settled between us. The air seemed to thicken, as though an invisible cord had drawn taut connecting us. Then he cleared his throat softly and returned his attention to the final adjustments. After completing the repair, he stood and tested the door's movement, opening and closing it several times. "Perfect now," he declared, cleaning his hands with a cloth rag. I moved closer to test it myself, our arms brushing briefly as I reached for the handle. Such minimal contact, yet I felt its warmth spread through me like a gentle current. Looking up to express my gratitude, our eyes met and held for one suspended heartbeat. His gaze seemed to search mine, as if seeking something unspoken in the narrow space separating us. His smile appeared softer then, carrying an emotion I couldn't decipher, before he stepped away. "Happy to help," he said simply, gathering his equipment. We walked toward the entrance together, that charged moment already fading back into everyday normalcy. But as he stepped onto the front walkway, afternoon sunshine pooling around his feet, I couldn't dismiss the sense that something fundamental had altered. Not dramatically or earth-shatteringly, but quietly, the kind of shift that whispers in your consciousness long after someone has departed. Returning to the kitchen, my gaze fell again on those cheerful daisies, their colors seeming more vivid in the slanted light. For reasons I couldn't name, I felt transformed, as if a window I hadn't realized was sealed tight had suddenly opened, allowing in air I wasn't certain I was prepared to breathe. The following week moved along in familiar patterns: solitary, morning coffee, household rhythms, occasional phone conversations with my husband updating me on their outdoor adventures. Yet beneath this comfortable routine, a subtle transformation had begun that I couldn't deny. My thoughts kept returning to that afternoon. Not the entire encounter, just specific fragments. How David's attention had seemed to linger, the unexpected gentleness in his expression, the way our momentary touch had continued to resonate after his departure. Despite knowing him for decades, he suddenly seemed like someone entirely new. Or perhaps the change was in me. Thursday brought an unexpected call. His voice carried its usual casual warmth. "I'm making a trip to the hardware store for some supplies. Thought I might bring over those extra hinges you could use for the other cabinet doors. Are you around?" After only the briefest hesitation, I replied, "Certainly, I'll be home." When he arrived, I was preparing afternoon tea. He entered carrying a small brown package and wearing that same relaxed smile, though this time I noticed additional details. The way his eyes seemed to survey the room before settling on me, as though searching for something recognizable. "I hope I'm not disturbing your routine," he said, noticing the steaming kettle. "Not at all," I assured him, gesturing toward the breakfast nook. "Please join me." He accepted readily, placing his package on the table while I filled 2 ceramic mugs. Fragrant steam rose between us, carrying hints of mint and honey. The kitchen seemed cozier than usual, despite the cool breeze flowing through my open window. We settled across from each other, our warm drinks creating a comfortable barrier. Initially, our conversation touched on ordinary subjects: his current home projects, new residents in the neighborhood. Gradually, though, our exchange began feeling less like routine catching up, and more like discovering aspects of each other we'd never bothered to notice. He described a solitary camping trip he'd taken to the coast the previous autumn. How the profound silence there had initially felt overwhelming, but ultimately made him feel more connected to himself. I shared my recent habit of taking early morning walks, seeking those precious moments before the world awakens when everything feels suspended in peaceful possibility. "That sounds exactly like you," he said, studying me over his mug. "You've always been someone who appreciates subtleties others overlook." His observation hung in the air between us, carrying more weight than it should have. Uncertain how to respond, I simply smiled and took another sip. A sudden breeze through the window lifted a section of hair across my forehead. Before I could brush it aside, David reached across the small table, his movement deliberate but gentle, and smoothed it back into place. Such a simple gesture, yet my heartbeat seemed to accelerate. His fingers lingered briefly, barely grazing my temple, before he withdrew. The atmosphere felt electric, though neither of us acknowledged what had happened. Instead, he cleared his throat quietly and said, "Conversations with you always feel natural." I laughed softly, attempting to restore lightness to the moment. I suppose that's what everyone claims. But internally, I recognized this was different. This wasn't about family politeness or shared connections. This concerned something unspoken, gradually building in the silence between our words. When he eventually prepared to leave, he paused at the threshold. "If you ever need assistance with anything at all, just call." I nodded, my fingers resting against the door frame. "I'll remember that." After his departure, I remained there watching his vehicle disappear down the street. The kitchen felt unusually quiet, residual traces of mint still perfuming the air. Deep within me, understanding was beginning to crystallize. Perhaps what I'd experienced during his first visit hadn't been imagination after all. Maybe something genuine had shifted between us. 3 days later, I found myself in the backyard at dawn, hands buried in rich earth, attempting to redirect my thoughts away from the persistent memories of David. Morning sun was just cresting the horizon, painting everything in that magical golden glow that transforms even mundane objects into something extraordinary. I assumed I was alone until gravel crunched behind me on the garden path. "Good morning," David's voice called, warm and familiar. Turning, I saw him standing by my garden gate holding a white bakery bag. "You're awake early," I observed, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. Picked up some fresh pastries from downtown. "Had a feeling you'd be out here working." I smiled, feeling pleasantly surprised. "Just happened to be in the area?" He shrugged, but amusement sparkled in his expression. "Something along those lines." We moved inside together, and soon the kitchen filled with the aroma of warm croissants. I prepared fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries, navigating my kitchen space as though he'd done so countless times. The ease felt natural, perhaps too natural, and I was beginning to understand how perilous such comfort could become. We shared breakfast at my small corner table, morning light streaming across its wooden surface. Our discussion started innocuously: gardening, techniques, weekend weather predictions. But gradually he leaned back, his gaze finding mine in that increasingly familiar way, as if seeing beyond surface conversation. "You seem different recently," he said quietly. "Different how?" I asked. "More aware somehow, like you're paying attention to things you hadn't noticed before." His perceptiveness startled me. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, letting its warmth fill my mouth before responding. "Perhaps I am." We lapsed into comfortable silence, the kind that vibrates with unspoken understanding, as though both of us were restraining words we weren't prepared to voice. Following breakfast, he offered to repair the squeaky hinge on my back gate. The morning air remained cool, and my garden still held the fresh scent of damp soil. While he worked, I stood nearby holding a small container of screws. At one point, he glanced up from his task, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for another fastener. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a quiet thrill through me. Whether he experienced it too remained unclear, but he didn't immediately pull away. Once the repair was complete, we stood side by side, surveying the garden. Together. "You've created something truly special here," he said softly. I turned to face him, struck by the genuine appreciation in his tone. "It's just plants and flowers." "No," he replied, meeting my eyes directly. "It reflects who you are. The whole space feels like you." His words seemed to float between us like the fragrance from nearby roses. I wanted to ask what he meant, but didn't. Instead, I thanked him for the pastries, for his help, for his thoughtfulness. He left shortly afterward, but that moment, those few sincere words, remained with me throughout the day. For the first time, I began wondering whether this quiet, developing connection was something we could continue to ignore indefinitely. The subsequent days carried additional weight, not oppressive, but as if each moment held deeper significance than before. I caught myself listening for the distinctive sound of his truck, glancing toward windows when footsteps seemed to approach my walkway. It was late Sunday afternoon when he appeared again. I hadn't contacted him, nor had he mentioned another visit. Yet there he stood at my door wearing that familiar, gentle smile. "I was passing through the neighborhood," he said, though we both understood that wasn't entirely accurate. I welcomed him inside, and we settled in my front room, the soft whir of the overhead fan creating gentle background noise. He chose the recliner, leaning forward with his forearms resting on his knees. I occupied the couch, cradling an untouched cup of tea. Our initial conversation covered predictable topics: the camping trip my husband had mentioned, current events, an interesting article he'd recently read. But beneath these surface exchanges lay that same growing awareness, the same tension that had been building between us for weeks. During a natural pause, he looked directly at me, truly looked, and said quietly, "I find myself thinking about you more often than I anticipated." I didn't respond immediately. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I kept my voice level. "You've been in my thoughts as well." He settled back, exhaling as though this admission had been weighing on him. The room seemed to warm, the air heavy with everything we'd avoided saying until now. "I don't want to create complications in your life," he said carefully. I shook my head slowly. "You haven't, but I think we both recognize something has evolved." He nodded, his expression steady yet soft, conveying a respect that made this intense moment feel safe despite its gravity. We didn't move closer. We didn't reach for each other. But in that shared space, we both acknowledged that whatever had been quietly developing between us wasn't merely imagination. It was real, and it mattered, perhaps more than either of us had anticipated. Eventually, he rose to depart. At the doorway, he hesitated, regarding me with that same searching look I'd first noticed weeks earlier. "If you ever need me," he said, "for any reason at all, I'll be here." I watched him walk down my front path, evening sun stretching his shadow across the lawn. After closing the door, I stood there momentarily, my palm resting against the cool metal handle. I understood that life would resume its familiar patterns. My husband would return home, days would continue their progression, and nothing about our circumstances would appear different to outside observers. But I also knew something within me had transformed, that I'd rediscovered a part of myself during those quiet moments with David. This wasn't about crossing boundaries or betraying commitments. It concerned being truly seen, genuinely understood, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. While I couldn't predict where this left us, one truth had become absolutely certain. Something profound had awakened, and there was no returning to who I'd been before.